Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Secure AF podcast. If you're just listening to this one, this is part two of a two-part episode in which we're talking about how to prepare for IRs. This is IR season. This is when hackers are looking for companies, organizations, and individuals to attack and to exploit. And so we wanted to approach what are sort of the common things that we see going into IRs that often are easy to exploit and therefore easy to fix. In part one, we talked about organizationally, what can you do as an organization to be ready for an IR to ensure that your people are supported and feel equipped to take the steps which we're now actually going to talk about. And so as we ended episode one of the things, Jonathan, you were talking about is how everybody in an organization and IT people need to realize that, of course, they're protecting the infrastructure, but a part of what they're doing is protecting people's private information. And I want you to speak to that. And just as a basic way that I've seen this come through, we've worked with hospitals and banks where maybe the network was pretty well secured, but let's say they had Telnet or FTP enabled on a printer, and that printer worked as a scanner, and the scanner kept images for a while. And so an attacker, through a very basic exploit, could get social security cards, financial information, bank records, account numbers. So what would you say to that? And maybe what are other things along that line that you would see as maybe specifically for those institutions, easy fixes because they're easy exploits?
Well, and not to go too CISO on this podcast,
you can't help but go to CISO. It's who you are.
This is true, yes. But in that particular case, that is just a basic data inventory. Do you know where your data is at? And I ask this question a lot. Do you have a data inventory? No. Okay, do you have a data flow diagram? Well, sort of. We have a network flow diagram. It's like, well, that's not as helpful. You need to know where your data is at. If your data is going on to a device, such as a printer, you need to do your risk analysis and all your standard compliance requirements on that printer. And here's the thing that I don't get. Security nowadays is built into just about everything. You have to go, in a lot of cases, out of your way to turn security off. Windows Firewall is a perfect example. It comes on by default since Windows XP Service Pack 2. We still go in and we find organizations that have turned the firewall off in their organization. And they have all different kinds of reasons for it. But the reality is they have disabled a major security control because it was easier, or they just didn't like it, or whatever the case is. But there's stuff built in. Printers have the security built in. They have encryption. You can reset passwords. You can turn off Telnet and FTP. You can do all this stuff on the. Why don't you? And sometimes, and this is going to sound really bad, it's because people are lazy. They don't want to mess with it. Oh, that's a printer. That's not my problem. That's help desk problem. And I, as a CISO, don't care. Fix it. I understand the whole point of everyone has a job to do, so everyone go do their job. But in no organization I have ever been, as it relates to IT, has it been where, oh, I can't touch that because that's someone else's job. If I can touch it and make it better and have the authority to do it, I'm just going to do it. That's my job. My job is to protect the organization. Do I hurt people's feelings? Yes. Do I make them feel inadequate? Sometimes, probably. It's like, why didn't you do this? Well, I didn't know. Okay, well, I did. Here, let me help you. Let me show you. Now, sometimes that really irritates them, by the way. They don't like to learn new things. And I'm not trying to be a jerk here. And I know people will take it that way, but one of my jobs at the university was to move chairs. I started when I started the job, that was my job, was to manage a room. I was working at the circulation desk in the library, but the other part of my job was I set up chairs and tables for events. I did that all the way to me becoming CISO. So I was there at the university for 20, well, at the time, about 20, well, total 22 years. I became CISO 9 years before I left. So do the math. But I was moving chairs as help desk supervisor, as director of computer and support, or whatever my title was at the time, all the way up to chief services officer. Then I became CISO. I was still moving chairs. The job needed to get done. I could do
Mhm.
it, so I did it. So, in a lot of times, with your printer example, someone has to go to the printer and go checkbox, 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 or uncheckbox, 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 change password, kerchunk, and you're done. It takes a minute and a half. You have 50 printers. Okay, well, that's going to be a couple of hours worth of work. Could you have an intern do it? Sure, do it.
Right.
If they're not around, you go do it. It's this is not an ego thing. I had somebody once who they were asked to do something, and they basically just kind of pushed it off and pushed it off and pushed it off because it was hard, and they were trying to write a script to do it because they didn't want to just sit there and manually do it. So they were going to write a bash shell script to do it. Now I'm all about bash shell scripts. I'll do one-liners all day long. But in this particular case, he couldn't do it. Took him months, well, weeks. Took him weeks to get this job done. I finally got mad and I just sat down and I did it one day. It took me about an hour to do it manually. And then it was done. It took him, let's say, 15 hours of procrastinating, thinking about it, writing a script, whatever. It took me an hour just to get it done. Could I have
Right.
had someone else do it? Well, sure. Did I just go ahead and do it? Yeah, because I needed it done. I need to move on with the process. So sometimes it's just easy things. It's just brute forcing it. You just sit down and go to. I had that problem here recently with a client where we were talking and they were asking me how to do something. I was like, well, I mean, yeah, you can get an application. It's going to cost this much. Or you could just go open up all the files and look. And that's what they did. But it's just open up all the files, look for this thing, and when you find it, copy and paste it out. So it probably took a handful of hours to do 100 documents or whatever, but it's done. You only have to
Mhm.
do it once and you move on. But people get lazy. They don't want to do it. They feel it's underneath them to go work on a printer. And no, if I can compromise that printer and get data or get access to a network, get access to a system as an attacker, attackers like lazy people
Mhm.
because they're not going to catch all the stuff that the attacker is going to do. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that the attackers get in, they bounce around networks for days, months, whatever, and either the security people or the IT people don't see it, don't know, don't understand, and they're hopefully unprepared to deal with the attack.
Right. Right. Because the same thing goes for the attackers. Not necessarily lazy, but the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's it's easier to not do something than it is to do something. So if I'm an IT, it's way easier to not spend the 2 hours on the printers. As an
Sure.
attacker, man, I was able to get some PII with zero effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, I could keep going, or
Or I'll
I've
just,
kind of I've already got some of what I want. Cool.
yeah. Yeah. One person's data, and some people will go, well, it's one person's data. Who cares? Well, that person does.
Yeah.
I don't want my data stolen. You know what gets me? This drives me nuts. Being in security, when I go somewhere and I see that they have poor security, I don't want to do business with them.
Mhm.
Or I lie. I just give them bad information because I know they're not going to protect my data.
Right.
So those people who say, well, it doesn't really matter. We've lost one person, 300, whatever. It does hurt. You do lose business because of it.
Right. So what would be some of the other things that we commonly see in IR that would be fixes people should make?
Oh, there's so many of them. Let me talk to you a couple of the big ones. Number one, your domain admins. We still go in and we find organizations that have 30 domain admins or global administrators now since they're moving to Azure AD. And that is absolutely not needed. Just in any way do you need more than a handful. If someone has more than 4 domain admins, I still question it. You
Hmm.
need a primary, you need a backup, maybe you need two, and then a backup. But you start getting to 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 domain admins. Now, what they're doing is, again, they're being lazy. Somebody needs to do something, maybe
Hmm.
reset a password or whatever. Instead of going and finding those individual permissions, they're just giving them domain admin. Or what's even worse, they're giving vendors domain admin. Now, the vendors will tell you we need domain admin. Do you know why? Because they don't want to work through the process of telling the client we need this permission, this permission, this permission. Just give us domain admin and we have everything we need. Well, they do. They have everything. And then they get compromised. Usually, that domain admin is actually shared among 5 or 6 people at the vendor. So you don't have any control over that. So deal with your domain admins. This is a hard problem. This is no, it's an easy solution. It's a hard problem because people know you shouldn't do this.
Hmm.
And I even had one client, this is a year and a half ago now. They basically we do a kickoff call whenever we have an IR. So as soon as we get ink, we get on a call with them. We say, okay, what's going on? Tell us everything. And they kept kind of bouncing around a particular issue. And I was on the call, but I wasn't leading the call. And I finally stopped and I was like, okay, I have a question. Was this a domain admin account that got compromised? And the 2 people on the other line just kind of hung their head and go, yes. Okay, that's completely different. You should
Hmm.
have led
Hmm.
with that. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm sorry. First of all, don't lie to us. We need to know this stuff so we can help you. Second of all, if they knew it was a problem, that this was a danger, they should have fixed it.
Right.
Now they don't want to because in some cases it's um it's a political thing or an emotional thing. You take away. I had somebody say that we can't take admin rights or can't take domain admin rights because the person would get upset. I don't care. I truly don't. As a CISO, I don't care if they get upset. If they don't need to have domain admin rights, I had one. It was the strangest thing. This person couldn't get a pay raise that year, so their supervisor gave them domain admin rights instead. Exactly. I had that same. It's like, what? That was their promotion, is they got domain admin rights. I didn't understand that. I still don't understand that, but that's what they did. Um, I was in an organization once that they had kind of an incident. It was more of an event. And I walked in. It's like, how many domain admins do you have? 42. Nope. And I got rid of them all. I created one for me. I created a backup one for me, and then I got rid of the rest. Or I just, took them out of the group.
Right.
Man, people were mad. For no reason, by the way. They'd call up, say, Jonathan, I can't do such and such. Why are you doing that? Well, when I come in, I always bring up ADUC. Okay, well, bring it up. Well, I can't do anything in it. What are you doing? What is it you're doing? Now, I was asking so I can go give them the right permissions to do it,
Right.
but they just wanted domain admin back. I was like, no,
Right.
no, and I was CISO at the time. I had that authority to be able to do that. And people were really upset over it. And fortunately, I was in a position that I could defend it and just say no, and I worked through every problem that whole day. Anytime someone came up and says, "Well, we have this service account that is not functioning," okay, it's a service account. It doesn't need domain admins. Let's find the permissions it does need and give it
Right.
that. So we went through the process and it was fine. Eventually, I think we got back up to 4 or 5 domain admin accounts, as a functional thing. But not 42.
Yeah.
It was crazy. We find domain admins that no one knows who it was.
Yeah.
It was just there. We find domain admins that hasn't been used in years. They got compromised because they had a bad password. So the domain admin is the issue. Now, again, this is global admin as well now because we're in Azure AD world. But if you're not managing those domain admins and you don't have a really good reason to have domain admin, then you probably shouldn't.
Mhm.
I've had supervisors that had domain admin. It's like, do you know what ADUC is? Well, no, but I need it in case I need it. That's a round argument. You need it because you need it.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way. So, managing your domain admins is critically important. Manage any elevated privileged account is critically important. You have to make sure you know what they are, you know what permissions they have, you know what they do, they know who manages it. Now, the other thing from the domain admin is don't use your daily use accounts.
Mhm.
Use a technician account, the traditional form of a technician. You have a separate account that is strictly for domain admins. When I have multiple accounts when I go to organizations. I have my regular account. I have a domain admin account. I have an admin account. I have a workstation admin account, a web application. I have 4 or 5 different accounts because I don't want to cross contaminate.
Right.
I don't want because what domain admin does, say you give domain admin to a server admin, or a workstation admin or whatever, they go and they log into a computer. Well, that hash is now on that machine.
Mhm.
And if I'm an attacker on there, I now can grab your password or, pass the hash or do whatever with it. So it's don't use those accounts unless you need it. If you don't need to have those specific permissions, don't use an account with those permissions.
Right.
Again, it comes down to laziness. Someone told me once that they don't like the fact that they have, 3 or 4 different accounts. I have like 472 different accounts that I deal with. I use a password manager. I keep them, everything's a different password. Everything's different multi-factor. It's just, it's scary that people won't do this stuff. It's not even they can't, because again, sometimes there are technical issues. But when they have the ability and they still choose not to do it, that's a really bad thing. That's what the attackers are wanting.
Right. It seems like a little bit related. Just looking at what rights a basic user has, because that's something else we'll find is, maybe we can't get a domain admin account, but you get a basic user account, and then you find out, wow, this person has access to
Oh yeah.
critical information, to all kinds of shares, to
Yeah.
and so
Well,
that seems like, again, to go to permissions. Like, what does this person actually need to do?
yeah. And that's the thing is, a lot of times people will just say, "Oh, you're a user," but then they have domain users in every share on the system instead of individually granting access. Oh, you need access to these 3 or 4 shares, or like role-based access. They don't. They just say, "Oh, you're a user. We're going to put domain users." And here's the thing that I hear a lot. Oh, well, we trust everybody. What? Yeah, we trust everybody. Everyone can just have access to this. That's not the way that works.
Right.
And it may be that you do trust everybody right now, but what about in 6 months from now when you now have concerns over this person but you've already given them access to everything? It's a I mean, I hate to say it like this. It's a dumb way of doing things. Of just grant all users access to everything. Number one, you can't do that from a compliance reason, like HIPAA. I had an organization once they said, "Oh, well, everybody here can just access all the data. We're going to, everyone is HIPAA certified." It's like, no, that's not the way the compliance works. They only can't get access if they need access.
Mhm.
They can only look at those files if they need to look at those files. And you have to maintain access control, actually monitor their access. So those things, and here's the thing, we talk about this and we're kind of making fun of this and, discussing it on a podcast, but these are serious issues that compliances are trying to make people do better at. I got into this argument once, not an argument, it was a friendly conversation, but somebody was saying that we don't need more compliance and regulation. We can do this ourselves. You can do them yourselves, but when you don't, that's when compliances come in and say
Right.
this. So if you constantly give every user access to something, the compliance is going to come back and go, that's not a good idea. You now have to do access control by role-based access and this and that. And they get mad at that. But they have to do it to force people to do the right things in terms of security.
Okay, so we've talked about sort of permissions, domain admins. What are some of the other ones that you see that are common common that you see in an IR?
MFA for sure. And I think I talked about that in the last podcast, but MFA is super critical. If you are not running MFA for all of your admin accounts, for all of your user accounts, for all of your accounts in general in your organization, you're doing it wrong. It's just you're putting everyone at risk. There were so many times MFA would have stopped an attack. Just flat out, it would have stopped it. The fact that they didn't have it. And again, it gets back to, well, we don't have enough people to really implement MFA. Huh. Give me 10 minutes. I'll turn it on for you. Thunk, there you go. Now, is there going to be support issues? Absolutely, there will be. People are going to have to get the MFA on their phone. They don't have phones. Okay, let's give them a token of something, RSA token, get a YubiKey, whatever.
Right.
Well, YubiKey's got compromised. Yes, the old ones did, so let's get the new ones. I mean, all these reasons that people come up with to say, no, I don't want to do multi-factor authentication, it just comes down to that they just don't want to put the effort into it. They don't put the effort or the money. They say it's going to have a negative impact on whatever. Sure, it probably will. Let's figure out how to fix that. Is it going to take more time to log in? Sure, it will. But I would much rather it take a couple of seconds longer to log in each time than have somebody from a foreign country log into your account and do bad things on it. So not having MFA, and it's still amazing how many people don't have MFA.
Mm.
Whole organizations. Now, in some cases, they can't get away from it. Some web services and software services, they are forcing you to MFA, and they get angry for it.
Mm-hmm.
It just drives me crazy. We should be tweeting it. If you do not have MFA turned on everywhere it is technically possible, then you're just playing with fire. You are not protecting your organization. You are not protecting the people in your organization, even though they may not want to do MFA.
Right.
If you're not there encouraging them, convincing them, or downright forcing them to do MFA, then you're kind of not doing the job.
Right.
It's a sucky job sometimes. I'll tell you this one little story. I had turned MFA on, and I may have told you the story before. I turned MFA on, and I was somewhere where there was people around me who were talking about me.
Oh
They
my
didn't
gosh.
know it was me. They didn't know, at the time I'd been CISO for a while. And so new people come in and they didn't know me. They didn't know what I look like. And so I'm sitting there and I'm listening to them badmouth me. And they didn't know it was me sitting there. One person did. And so he just sat there and laughed. And I was not very comfortable. I was trying to get off, get off that bus. And it's like, okay, just get me off this bus. I don't want them to know it's me. And I was able to get off of it with very little, interaction with that. But they weren't very happy with me because I was making them do MFA. However, during that time, it was right at the beginning of COVID when I pushed MFA across the board for my organization. And I was staying up at night where the term midnight CISO comes in, that my name that I do my podcast on. And it's because I was doing a lot of stuff at midnight, and I was watching the logs. And as
Mm.
those logs were, as I saw accounts getting compromised, midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, I would disable the account and I would call the person. It's like, hey, such and such, your account has been compromised. Please give me a call back in the morning. I'll help you get it back into your account. I've disabled it. Well, I think I called 15 or 20 people in the middle of the night that way. And very quickly, they were very supportive of implementing multi-factor authentication. because they didn't want me calling them in the middle of the night.
Right.
But I didn't want them to wake up in the morning, their account is now compromised. They can't do anything. Their stuff is gone, so I just disabled the account and I called them up. Sometimes they'd actually answer the phone, which was always a funny conversation. It's like, hey, this is Jonathan over in IT. Your account seems to be compromised. I reset the password, blah, 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 blah. And they always thanked me thanked me for taking care of their account. But it was a way to protect the organization and to show people why this is important.
Right. Yeah, I often think anything that's an inconvenience for me is a barrier for an attacker. Like, it's inconvenient for me to do MFA.
Yeah.
That makes it inconvenient for the attacker too.
Well, yeah, and actually the next one on my list here is the RDP one that you were talking about earlier. If you have RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, open at your firewall that you can log in from the internet to get into it, that makes it easy for you, but also makes it easy for the attacker. And all they need is a good username and password. I've seen some admins who they say, well, we changed the port, so it's a different port. It's not 33A9. So I'll scan any open ports and then I'll look at the protocols and see what's, what the banners are and whatever to see what it is, or I'll just randomly connect to it. It's, if I'm lucky, then it's a web server and it's easy and I can just poof, there's a web page. But if it's not, I'm going to try a dozen different things. I can script that. Here, try all these things on this port. And when one is successful, let me know. And I didn't have to look at it. I just let it run. So changing the port doesn't mean anything anymore. Obscurity is not security. If it makes it easier for you, it makes it easier for the attacker. So that's something to take into consideration. And it's, again, I hate to say it like this, but it's a laziness thing. Yep, it would be much more secure to log into a VPN client first with multi-factor authentication and then get into your RDP. So in one of my organizations, we set up a jump box. So we use segmentation. We're going to get segmentation in a few minutes, but we set up segmentation in between a couple of, some critical server networks and regular server networks and this and that, and whatever. But to get to those critical networks, you had to jump into a jump box. We called it Jumper. So you logged into it, multi-factor. And then from there, you jumped into another network. So it's a one-to-one connection. And then from there, you can jump out of that box into another box. So you had, at times, 2 or 3 or 4 RDP sessions nested. So I would RDP into my office location, my office desktop. And then from there, I'd go into Jumper. So that's 2. From Jumper over to the next one, that's 3. From that one over to the actual server I need to work on, that's 4. 4 RDP connections. System administrators hated it. They would go out of their way to go log into the vSphere client to log in directly to the VM because they didn't want to jump through all the boxes. However, those jump boxes prevented 99% of the attacks to that server network. Probably 99.9% of the attacks, because you couldn't get there. There was segmentation there. Did it make it a little bit more inconvenient? Well, sure it did, but it didn't make it easy for the attackers either.
Right. So you mentioned segmentation. What would you say on that topic for
segmentation? It's really simple. Don't have flat networks where if you're on a workstation somewhere on your network, if you could jump to another workstation or jump directly to a server or direct to your management network or whatever, you don't want that. You want to have segmentations around that network. Now, if you go back, that's the general concept of VLANs, virtual LANs. And the intent was to make sure that all the traffic on one VLAN stayed on one VLAN and traffic on another one didn't cross over. Now they don't use them like that anymore. Now it's just organization for them. And now they dynamically route the stuff back and forth. So it's all just a flat network. But if I'm sitting on your wireless, I should not be able to RDP directly to a workstation somewhere else. I should not be able to port scan all of your servers. I should not be able to hit your critical infrastructure. You want to have a segmented network for the workstations, a segmented network for servers, Now, if you have a server that everyone needs to get to, okay, you put that in your some form of a DMZ, that old mindset of DMZ, but you have it to where that server can be accessed, but not all your other ones. What it does is it prevents pivoting. So if I
Mhm.
get on a workstation, I can't just attack all of your servers and look for vulnerability. I might be able to attack one of your servers, but I'm not attacking everything. I do not see segmentation out there.
Mhm.
They had this concept 5 or 6 years ago about micro segmentation, where everyone can't talk to anything unless you specifically allow. And I'm okay with that. That's fine. Zero trust model and such. But even just basic segmentation, put your servers on a network. Only allow certain things. Put zones in place so that your firewall actually manages the traffic back and forth so you can see it.
Mhm.
When people say east-west traffic, if you consider workstation to server east-west traffic, that's a bad thing. Workstation to workstation, sure, got it, understood. You've got everything on a local subnet, whatever. But east and west should not be server to workstations as a general rule. You should have those somewhere else from a network perspective through the firewall with firewall rules. Yes. Is it more overhead? You have to build more firewall rules? Yes. Is there, more horsepower in the firewall? Yes. Does it prevent somebody from getting on a workstation and then bouncing around and do bad stuff? Yes. That's the whole point.
Mhm. Right, because it prevents them from doing bad stuff by making it not easy for anyone to do it.
Yes. But that easiness is kind of you get used to it. So
Mhm.
we had our management networks behind a VPN. So if you were on the workstation network and had to get access to like the network infrastructure, you would VPN into that. And it's like, well, I don't want to run the VPN. I don't want attackers doing, this stuff on the
Right,
network.
right.
So I was like, oh, okay. And once you got used to it, it wasn't a big deal. But the tools are there. I guess that's really the key thing is we know how to defend this stuff. We've been able to do it for years. People just don't do it. And
Mhm.
what happens is they get compromised.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, the compromise is bad enough, the ransomware and all this stuff. The cleanup of it sucks. Just doing that for months. It's going to take months to do the cleanup. And I would much rather put months in prep and doing good
Mhm.
security controls than months of cleanup and dealing with all the consequences after an IR.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that we've seen is a difference between a company that had paid attention to the controls and one that hadn't.
Yeah.
And both may get an IR, but what we find is the company that has good controls, it's far less impact. And often it's, well, yeah, the attacker managed to get in, but then couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
So it's still figuring out where's that original, point of access. How do we shut that down? But
Yep.
it's much easier than, um, wow, you haven't had the controls in place.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to rebuild your whole network.
Yeah. I mean, and we've had some clients here recently that have had to rebuild from scratch the whole thing.
Yeah.
That goes into two more things. I know we're coming up hard on time, or for hard stop on time. But so here's two things that I really want to give you. Number one is patches. Patch
Hmm.
your stuff. If you have stuff that you cannot patch, you better put extra security around it. So if you have to run a Windows XP box because of whatever, okay, that's fine. Put an additional small firewall in front of it and control it that way. The other one is now, if you have an IR, incident response, you're going to have to do disaster recovery.
Hmm.
So you better have good backups. Now, when I talk about good backups, number one, you have to actually take backups. So that's critical. You actually have to use them. It has to be offline, air gapped or immutable or something to where you can't delete those backups. You need to make sure that no one in your organization can actually delete a backup. Now, people will say, oh, well, we have to have two people do it, or I've seen it fail. Attackers
Hmm.
get in, they figure out what they need, and they go and delete it. But if you have a third party that is otherwise managing your backups, or if you have a completely offline backup, air gap backup, whatever, it an attacker can't get in there and delete the backups before they ransomware everything. And we've had it happen. Certainly don't put your backups on the same the same storage unit as all your other stuff, because they'll just take your storage unit out.
Right.
So having good backups. The other piece of backups is you have to practice with them.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to restore your backups to full production. Not just test the file, not just look in there and see if there's data in there, but actually, can you bring your backups from a backup file with nothing else there? So your entire infrastructure is gone. All you have are these backups that's sitting out in Iron Mountain. Can you actually recover from them? A lot of times they can't. They've never done it. So I encourage them, if for their monthly backup tests, they do their backups, they take their deltas for the week. On Friday, they take their final delta, they shut the system down, they start the recovery process, they bring their recovery of that backup all the way to full production, they deploy their deltas, make sure all the dependencies are working, and then that becomes the running production version of that tool or that server or whatever for Monday. And if it works, great. They get rid of the old VM. If it doesn't work, they can always revert back to the old VM. But if you have not practiced your backups all the way to production, sometimes it's even if you have a server that is bare metal, you're going to have to practice bringing that bare metal system back up. What if it's completely gone? What if you have to get a new one in? Can you take your backup, put it on there, and bring it up to full production? Until you've practiced that, you don't have that. There was a guy who we used to, system administrator. He was generally a nice guy. He could be a jerk sometimes. But he says, a lot of times people, they have a backup tool, and those files that are there, they've never recovered. So they don't have backups, they have files.
Right.
You really need to make sure you have backups and you can recover. And you need to make sure that no one in the organization can delete those files. Because if you can delete them, let's say with the domain admin account, the attacker can get in there and the attackers know the backup systems. They know Commvault. They know all these different ones. They find them and they get into them, either through a vulnerability or otherwise, and then they just delete all the backups.
Right. Or they leave malware on there so that when you try to restore the backup is also, damaged. So therefore your restoration doesn't work.
Every cleverness that we come up with in security controls, the attackers are being even more clever in the attacks that they're doing. Right. So we had an organization last year that was the first thing they did. The attackers deleted all the backups. Then they ransomwared everything. Right. So, I mean, they got domain admin pretty quick, so they could do all that. But when we asked, okay, where's your backups? Well, they're gone. All right, where's your backup of the backups? Do you have them off-site anywhere? Do you have them in Iron Mountain? Do you have them taped? What do you have? It's like, no, we just, with this new system we bought, it says we didn't need to do any of that. Okay, well, let's figure out how to rebuild then.
Right. So it seems like, to kind of wrap up, that there's two elements. Well, actually, so three elements. One is knowing what best practices are. So being informed, this is what you should do. Two, actually developing that practice, that habit. So regularly scanning your network. Are there things that you need to be paying attention to? Actually going and addressing those and making that a habit. And then the third is kind of the emotional part of knowing that you're going to be the bad guy in people's eyes. You're going to get emotional. That's your job. But also then organizationally, really working with management and with senior leadership to say, okay, when we're rolling these things out, this isn't just an IT thing. Like this is actually preventing risk to the organization. So we need your support.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you've hit all of those right on the head. And those are the things. This job is hard. Security is hard. We know it. But that hard comes with the fact that we are constantly getting attacked. Every organization, every IP address that's on the internet is getting attacked. The attackers want a way to make money. You are going to be that way if you don't protect this stuff.
Right. Thank you, Jonathan. This has been a great conversation. And everyone out there, if you have questions, if you're in need, we're happy to come help, with an IR. If you want help getting ahead of an IR, we can come in and look at your playbooks, look at, your plans and help you be ready. So again, during this season, this unfortunate IR season, be safe, be aware, and be prepared. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.